Right, so that's the crank in torqued, main bearings torqued up with obviously the ARP lube. I've now finally fitted all the pistons and con rods, and I've just nipped up the actual bolts themselves. So what I've got to do now is to take each bolt out, lube it up, and then torque it down to 63 pounds. I should be doing it in 3 stages. I should be doing it at 20, 40, and then 63. So I'll just do one, so you've got some idea of what I'm doing. So I bolt out, and then plenty of lube on the thread and underneath the bolt head. And put some on the actual rod itself as well. I've set the torque wrench to 20. So I'll just torque these to 20. Right, so I'm going to do each one exactly the same, all to 20. Then I'll go 40 and then 63. Right, I've done me 20, I've done me 40. Now I'm going to do me 63, which is the final torque. So I'm going to start down this end. Right, that's the bottom end torquey bits all done. Let's make sure we've still got play. Right, happy with that. Right, so we can continue and... Right, I've fitted me head gasket, which is a 51 thou 1 multi-layer steel, and I've dropped the head on. Haven't done anything else yet. I have put a bit of assembly lube in each of the threads into the block to allow when I put the studs in. The kit I'm using for the head bolts is a 154-4205. It's a head stud kit, 12 point with collars to drop in to the head. There's 2 lengths of studs, a short and a long. The short go along there and the long go along the top. So I add just a smidgen of lube to the coarse thread. Rub it in with your fingers and then screwing down finger tight. So we do that with the short ones. And exactly the same with the long ones. Just go finger tight for the moment, and we go all the way down until we've done them all. Right, I've now done all mine and they're all finger tight. So the next thing we have to insert are the top hats. These are the top hats which drop down over the bolt and into the head. And we give that a bit of lube. We can get it out. Is under the washer or the head, under the insert. Drop that over and push that down, and then add a little bit to the thread. And onto the surface of the insert. We go ahead and we do those 5 and the top 5. Right, once all the inserts have been inserted, or collars, then just nip up the studs. I found if you nip them up before you insert the collars, they may not be a nice sliding fit. So you take a nut, put some on the bottom surface of it and squeeze them up into the thread. And just do them up finger tight. And we do that for the other 9. Right, that's the first head fitted. ARP studs have all been fitted, top hats have been fitted, and all molly lubed up. You now have to torque them down to a total of 80 foot-pounds in 3 stages. So I'm going to go 25, 60, 80. There's a specific sequence to tighten them up in, which I've labelled on the head so I don't forget. It basically goes 1, 2 on the exhaust side, 3, 4 over here, 5, 6 over here, 7, 8 over here, 9 and 10. So that's what I'll start to do, and I'm going to do it at £25 to start with. It's now time to torque them down, and we're using a 1/2 inch socket, which is a multi-sided one to suit the nuts. So I'm set up to £25. So we start off with number 1. Two, so I set torque wrench now to £60, repeat the process, then set the torque wrench to £80 and again repeat the process. Right, I've done the 25, I've done the 60, this is now the 80, which is quite a lot. Hope I've got the strength to do it. Bloody hell. God, gee. 7. That's them all in hand tight. And identical to the other cylinder head, what we now do is add the top hats. So we take some ARP lube and we go around on the bottom top hat on, pushing down, and we do all along the front and all along the back. Right, once all the top hats are in, just go around an Allen key and just literally make sure the studs are bottomed out. I think on this engine, because it's an early block, the actual holes, or threaded holes into the block, are blind. I think on later blocks, probably 1980 onwards, I'm sure someone will correct you, into the water jacket, and you've got to put a silicone sealer on the actual bottom of the bolt or stud, otherwise you get water ingress coming up. But someone out there knows more about that than I do. That's just a passing comment. Right, next we have to put the nuts on. So again, no changes to last time. Get the lube round on the face that's going to touch, and a little bit up into the threads. And that's nuts, top hats fitted. Torque wrench is set to 25 pounds. And we now have to go around and torque them up. So the order on this side is always looking from the exhaust port. It goes one over the top, over the back, and then two, and then three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. That's the order we go in. So we start off with number 1. 2, and so on until we've done all the way around. That's 25 done. I've now set torque to 60. So we just go around these again in the right order to 60. One. Right, so that's done to 60, so then 25, 60. I now set the torque wrench to 80. So this is the workout one. One, 10. Woo! Right, so that's all those torqued up. So next job now is to just clean off the ARP lubricant on the outside ones, not wear it on the inside because that'll get covered in oil. So we'll now go ahead and do that. Right, that's all the threads cleaned off, or not the threads, the areas around where the bolts went in, studs. I'm now going to loosely fit a spark plug into each hole because we don't want any foreign material going in there. The spark plugs I'm going to use are an auto light, and the number is 3924. But these are the ones I will be running it on to start with. Whether we change to a hotter or colder plug, I've got no idea at the moment. But, with no copper grease on the threads yet. This is purely just to stop any debris going down into the plug hole. So that's nicely cleaned up. So we're more or less ready to move on to the next section. Before I do though, I'll just put what's going to be the exhaust manifold bolts back in. I'm going to be using an Allen bolt, an Allen headed bolt, to hold on my exhaust header, as this has a smaller diameter than a nut, which will allow me to do a better manifold. Right, on to the next bit. Right, it's now time that I've got both heads on and torqued down. We need to fit the hydraulic tappets. What I'd like to do with these, before I fit them, we've already done a check, pull apart and rebuild, is we've got a little hole in the side. I'd like to take an oil can, line it up with the hole, and squirt until you see oil come out inside. And if you can see that, then we had oil coming up into the orifice there. So I put that one to one side and we go through and do them all the same as that. And then once that's done, just wipe off excess from the outside, because we're going to be applying an assembly lube before we drop them in. So do that to all 16. Right, now we're going to drop each hydraulic tappet into any particular holes. This bit gets a little bit messy. I always like to put a bit of assembly lube round it, rub it well and truly in. Try not to get any on the bottom because we've got the break-in fluid on the bottom, on the actual camshaft itself. And dropping down in. On some tappets, they're too long and you've got to put them in before you put the head on. But this particular combination I'm using here, we don't have that problem. So just work your way along and load in all 16. Right, that's all 16 in. Obviously we still haven't connected the camshaft to the crankshaft, so just give the camshaft a few rotations, make sure all the tappets are moving up and down and none are sticking up. That's quite a nice feeling. So that's that part done. Next part is to put the push rods in. We need to make sure that there's first of all, they're hollow because the oil is pushed in one end and comes out the other to oil the rockers. So using one of these bottle brushes again, we make sure we clean it out. So give it a spray, bottle brush in, backwards and forwards. Blow through, and then what I'd like to do is to give it an oil. So I squirt in oil until it comes out the other end, and then we take that over to the engine. Holding to the ends so the oil doesn't come out, and turn him over, keep your finger on this end, drop him into one of the hydraulic tappets, and you take your finger off the end. And we do that for all 16. Right, that's all my push rods in. For those interested, I haven't actually told you, the push rods I'm using are SUM's G6413. The hydraulic tappets I'm using are SUM HT900. At some point in this series I'll display a full list of every item I've used and its summit part number. Right, next job then now is to put on the rockers, the plates that hold the rockers in position, and loosely do all those up. I've already shown how to set those up. But what I haven't shown is that once we're happy with the position, what we torque these two or these 8 on each side studs down to, and we also use a Loctite because we don't want them coming undone. So that's the next section I'll do. I'll just deal with this set here, and then it'll be the same all the way through. Right, so I've got my rockers on there. I'll tighten these by hand and then drop the rocker on, make sure it engages with the push rod. And if you remember, what we're looking for is the roller. You can position it by sliding this part. So we're looking for the roller to be dead center, left, right. So then take off, undo, I'm using a Loctite 243, which doesn't want to come out. There we go. Just a small amount on the thread. Smear it around with your finger. Back into the hole. And tighten him down. Put the rocker back on. And again, confirm that when you move it backwards and forwards, it's central. And we slip that down first of all. Hand tight. And we double check it with the roller, with the rocker. Make sure it hasn't moved. And now we torque it down. And it wants to be torqued down to 50 pounds. Right, that's one side done. All torqued up with Loctite. Haven't actually put any of the caps to hold the rockers in place at the moment. I should do the other side. For those interested, the rocker set I'm using, where are we? There we are, is a Summit G6940B with 3/8 studs. And the rocker studs, there we go, is a 6409-16 AFRs. Right, so the next job after I've done the other side is to set up the links or the play, which is what I will do next. There's one important point I forgot to mention when you're setting up the spacers, well, not when you're setting up the guides, is shine a light from underneath. You can see I've got a light down here, and look up where the push rod comes up, and then just once you've done it up tight, just wobble it side to side. Make sure the push rod touches the guide plate on each side and doesn't bang up against the actual head itself. If it does, then just tweak the bolt, loosen it slightly, slide the guide plate just a touch so the push rod doesn't touch the head. It may mean that the roller isn't exactly on the top of the valve, but that is far more acceptable than having the push rod rubbing against the head. Right, so both heads have been torqued. We've set up all the push rods and the guides and push rod studs, but what we haven't done yet is secured the actual rockers to the studs. So before we can do that, we have to connect the camshaft to the crank. We already went through this as a dry run, so this time it's going to be for real. I'm putting this on fairly dry, as I don't want actually oil all over the floor, so I keep falling over. So what I will do is, before I put the timing cover on, then I will actually plaster everything in oil before I do that. I'm going to go for a 0 setting on the camshaft, so that's no advance, no retard. so the 0 lines up with the keyway. And I've rotated the camshaft so that the dot is directly down to where the keyway is on the crankshaft. So that all lines up with each other. So we pull the sprocket back slightly. We take off the sprocket off the cam. And we go over. I don't know if I'm going to be in the right position to start with, probably not. Right, so that's the sprocket on the 0. So that's not going to go right there, so you need to be 1/10 round, I reckon. Let's see how that looks. So start to slide the sprocket onto the crank. At the same time, slide the cam sprocket back as well. And if we got it right, because we haven't moved anything, it should line up with the dowel. So we carry on going back, and looks like we're going to have to turn it very slightly. I don't know if I can do this, because obviously the pistons are in now, so that makes it a little bit more difficult. There we go. And we'll check, I've got the timing. I'm not 1/10 out. Right, I'm now onto the camshaft. So what we're looking for is everything being in a straight line. I reckon if I turn the crank ever so slightly. Right, so I'm going through the centre of the wheel, centre of the cam, the dot on the cam sprocket, straight down to the keyway on the crank. Now if I was 1/10 out, then that would be quite a dramatic difference. We certainly wouldn't see the dot on there. So I'm quite happy now I've got that in the 0 position. So I'm just going to run this in a moment. Make sure your pin's in there, just to pull it in. I'm not going to put any lubrication on there at the moment. Just want to nip it up. We're just going to rotate the engine with the cam attached to it. Remember, there are no bolts in the lifters, so it's not going to open and close any valves. Making sure there's no tight spots as we go around. That's one rev. And you can see, because it's a 2-to-1, the key is there, but the dot is now up top. As we come round, you can see now the key, the dot and the centre of that will line up. And let's have a final check that I'm happy with everything there. So at this point now we can torque this nut up, or torque this bolt up. And the actual bolt we're using, there we go, is a Ford cam bolt kit. It's a 154101, one bolt, one washer, comes with the torque settings. If you measure it, it's a 3/8, so we have to torque that to 45 foot-pounds. Now I'm going to torque that to 45 foot-pounds, but I'm not going to use the AR lube. I'm going to use a Loctite on that one. So I've just got to set the torque wrench up. What I will do is I actually put some lube under the bolt head and on the washer itself. So lock tight to the thread. And this is where we do it up to 45 foot-pounds. I've already set my torque wrench to 45. I guess the crank will stop it rotating, but it might not. So what I'll do is I'll quickly put some spark plugs in, which will add a bit of compression. There we go. Right. So that's 45. I'm now going to put the retainers down onto each of them. Just make sure that the inner is just protruding slightly. I don't know, a couple of millimeters. But before we put it on, we need to put a little bit of assembly lube on the thread. Just screwing down by hand. Until he touches. But before we do that, we've forgotten to apply a way of doing it. So what I will do is I will immerse each one of these, I think, into oil and then load it on there. First thing we do is we put a bit of lube on the top of the push rod, put some on top of the valve and some on the thread. Then we take our rocker, which I've just sat in some oil. Make sure, actually in a bucket of oil, make sure the flat surface is facing you. Drop him over. Make sure he seats down okay. And screw him down until he's just finger tight. What you don't want to do is to screw it so it starts to compress the hydraulic tappet or hydraulic lifter. Then we repeat that with the next one. And so on through on those 8 and the 8 on the other side. For those that are interested, the way it all gets its oiling system is the oil goes into the hydraulic lifter, comes up through a small button hole in the top of the lifter, comes up the push rod through the hole in the top of the push rod. That then enters through a hole in the top of the rocker, which is drilled through, so oil then squirts out into this recess here, which then drains down to this particular bearing here, so it lubricates that one. But then on the other side, there is another hole, because this does fill up with oil, and that hole drains down onto that wheel there, which rolls on the valve. So it's a up, across and down is the way it gets its oil flow. For those that are interested, the way I'm soaking the rockers is I've got a cap off a can of spray paint filled up with a 5W Mobile 1 oil, just for the moment. It doesn't matter what oil I'm using. and literally drop the rocker in, fish it around a little bit, and while it's sat in there, I just put a bit of lube, as I described before, on the valve heads, top of the push rod and the stud, and lift him out, turn him over and drop the roller bit in. And then when we lift out, just spin him round, catch hold and spin him round while there's a load of oil on there. That'll get it down into the bearings, and then just mop off the excess. Makes it easier then just to load it on. Right, we're now going to set up the backlash, lash, clearances, whatever you want to call it. So we've put all the caps, all the bolts on, and they're all really up near the top end. So we can turn the engine over now and none of the valves will operate, although the hydraulic tappets are lifting. So I start with this one here, and what we're looking for is first one to come up, which is the exhaust, and then we'll see the inlet come up. So notice the exhaust is now maximum up. Exhaust is now going down, and as it goes down we've got the inlet coming up. We have the inlet going down, and when you stop moving, if we then put on another quarter turn, then they're down on what we call the base circle. So we can then set up the clearances. So the way to do it is to clean push rod, so you grab hold of it, and then finger tight, turn down the nut while rotating the push rod until you can just feel a bit of resistance, and do that same with the exhaust one. Just a bit of resistance. The other way of doing it is to see if you can move the push rod up and down. Keep moving him up and down while you tighten the nut until you can't move it anymore. And that's about the same as feeling resistance. So just go back and check each one. As you're happy with that, there's various tightening sequences now you do. Some say you do that half turn, some say a full turn. So I'm actually going to go for a half a turn. So I come round, half a turn, and we do the same with this one. Come round half a turn. And then we do up the lock nuts, or the lock keys, lock bolt, and then put a spanner on there. Which I'll just go and get. Right, well that was total. So what I just shown you, you didn't see. So what I actually did was I rotated this one until I couldn't move the push rod, and ditto that one. I then turned that half a turn on there, and then we tighten down the lock screw in the middle. So put a 5/8 spanner to stop that turning, and we tighten him down. Now I'm going to put a small tube on there as I want to do that up tight. Right, I don't know what the torque is for this one, so it's a fillet sort of size. And then the other one the same. And then we're going to rotate the engine once to confirm that there's no problems. We should see these valves opening and closing. So we're now lifting the exhaust. Exhaust is closing, small bit of overlap, and we're lifting the inlet, and the inlet's closing. We're just going once more. Exhaust, and inlet. Then we move on to the next pair, and again what we do, we look for the exhaust just closing, then we look for the inlet opening, inlet just closing, and then we turn the engine over a quarter of a turn. So we do that on all the valves. Right, that's the other side now done. So all rockers have been done, backlash has been set up. We'll just turn it over a few times and it's all done. It's quite pleasing to see all push rods, hydraulic lifters, rockers, valves opening and closing, and little popping noises as we turn it over. You need to do this with no spark plugs in, otherwise you won't be able to turn it over. So we've now reached a position where we finish that part of the top end.